What you're about to see will change everything you thought you knew about California's coastline. Right now, as you're watching this video, something unprecedented is happening along the California coast. Beaches that have stood for thousands of years are disappearing, not slowly, not gradually, but at a rate that has scientists using words like alarming, unprecedented, and terrifying. In the last 72 hours alone, over 15 feet of beach has vanished from some of California's most iconic shorelines. Houses that were once a safe distance from the ocean are now perched on the edge of crumbling cliffs. Roads are collapsing, infrastructure is failing, and the people who have studied these coastlines their entire lives, they're saying something they've never said before. We've never seen this before. I'm about to show you evidence that will shock you. Footage that hasn't been widely reported, and information that raises a disturbing question: is this just the beginning? Stay with me, because what's happening in California could be coming to a coastline near you. Let's start with what's actually happening right now. Over the past week, multiple California beaches have experienced what geologists are calling catastrophic erosion events. We're not talking about normal tidal patterns. We're not talking about seasonal changes. We're talking about beaches literally vanishing overnight. In Pacifica, just south of San Francisco, residents woke up to find that 30 feet of beach had disappeared in less than 12 hours. 30 feet. In one night. Down in Santa Barbara, the iconic Butterfly Beach has lost so much sand that the bedrock underneath is now exposed. Bedrock that hasn't seen sunlight in over 10,000 years. And in San Diego County, entire sections of coastal walking paths have fallen into the ocean. The city has closed more than 2 miles of beachfront because it's simply too dangerous. But here's what makes this truly disturbing. This isn't happening in one location. It's happening simultaneously up and down the entire California coastline. From Crescent City in the north, all the way down to Imperial Beach at the Mexican border. Over 840 miles of coastline, all experiencing the same phenomenon at the same time. Coincidence? Scientists say no. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a coastal geologist who has studied California beaches for over 30 years, told reporters just yesterday, "In all my years of research, I have never witnessed erosion at this scale and speed. Something fundamental has changed." Something fundamental has changed. Let that sink in for a moment. In Half Moon Bay, a local fisherman who has worked these waters for 42 years said he doesn't even recognize the beaches anymore. Coves, where he used to launch his boat, have completely disappeared. Tide pools, where generations of children explored marine life, are now just deep water. The landmarks he used to navigate by are simply gone. In Monterey, officials have had to relocate a historic lighthouse that stood on the same spot since 1875. The cliff it was built on has eroded so severely that the structure was in danger of collapsing into the sea. Moving a 150-year-old lighthouse wasn't in anyone's budget or plans, but they had no choice. In Huntington Beach, known worldwide as Surf City, USA, the beach that gave the city its identity is shrinking at an alarming rate. During high tide, there's barely any beach left at all. Surf shops and beachfront businesses that have operated for decades are now watching the ocean creep closer every single day. These aren't just statistics. These are real places with real history, and they're changing in ways that shouldn't be possible in such a short time frame. To understand how shocking this is, you need to understand California's relationship with its beaches. For over 100 years, California's coastline has been remarkably stable. Sure, there were seasonal changes. Winter storms would take away some sand, summer tides would bring it back. It was a natural rhythm that people could count on. In the 1950s and 60s, California experienced a massive coastal development boom. Millions of people moved to beach communities, billions of dollars were invested in beachfront property, and it all made sense because the beaches were reliable, historical data shows that between 1950 and 2000, the average California beach lost only about 6 inches per year. 6 inches. That's manageable. That's predictable. Cities could plan around it. Homeowners could adapt. Life went on. Engineers designed buildings with the understanding that beaches would erode slowly over time. They built with safety margins. They calculated how long structures would last, and for decades their calculations were accurate. Coastal communities developed entire economies based on the stability of their beaches. Tourism industries flourished. Real estate values soared. The California coast became synonymous with the American dream, a place where you could build a life by the ocean and pass it on to your children. But something changed around 2010. The rate of erosion started to increase, not dramatically at first, just noticeably. Scientists documented it, but the general public didn't really pay attention. By 2015, the average had jumped to 2 feet per year, concerning but still within the range of natural variation. By 2020, 4 feet per year. And now, in 2025, we're seeing beaches lose more than that in a single day. The graph of coastal erosion over the past 75 years looks like a hockey stick. Relatively flat for decades, and then an almost vertical spike. Something has accelerated dramatically. And what we're seeing right now might just be the beginning of that acceleration. Coastal engineers who designed structures to last a century are watching their work fail in just 20 or 30 years. Urban planners who mapped out coastal development for the next 50 years are realizing their plans are already obsolete. Insurance actuaries who calculated risk based on historical data are finding that the past is no longer a reliable predictor of the future. The rules have changed, and nobody knows exactly what the new rules are. So what's actually causing this? The answer is more complex and more disturbing than you might think. Let's start with the obvious suspect, rising sea levels. Yes, global sea levels are rising. That's well documented. The ocean has risen approximately 8 inches over the past century, with the rate of rise accelerating in recent decades. But here's the thing. 8 inches of sea level rise doesn't explain what we're seeing. Not even close. The erosion patterns are far more severe than what rising sea levels alone would cause. Dr. James Chen, an oceanographer at UCLA, explains it this way. Sea level rise is definitely a factor, but it's more like it's removing the safety margin. The beaches were already in a delicate balance, and rising seas push them past a tipping point. A tipping point. Think about it like this. Imagine a glass filled almost to the brim. Adding just a few more drops causes it to overflow. Those few drops didn't cause the problem by themselves. They were just the final push that made the system collapse. That's what's happened. With California's beaches. Rising sea levels are the drops that pushed an already stressed system over the edge. But it's not just sea level rise. There are at least 4 major factors working together, creating what scientists call a compound disaster. Factor number 1, changes in ocean temperature. The Pacific Ocean off California's coast has warmed by nearly 3 degrees Fahrenheit over the past 50 years. That might not sound like much, but it's enough to fundamentally alter wave patterns. Warmer water means more energetic waves. More energetic waves mean more erosive power, but temperature changes also affect ocean currents. The California current, which flows southward along the coast, has shifted its patterns. This affects how sediment moves along the coastline. Areas that used to receive sand from northern beaches aren't getting that supply anymore. Additionally, warmer water expands. This thermal expansion contributes to sea level rise beyond just melting ice. The ocean is literally taking up more space. Factor number 2, changes in storm frequency and intensity. California is experiencing what meteorologists call atmospheric rivers more frequently than ever before. These are massive storms that dump enormous amounts of rain and create huge waves. In the past, California might see 2 or 3 major atmospheric rivers per year. This year, we've already had 9, and it's only January. Each atmospheric river brings waves that can reach 20 thigh, RTI, even 40 feet high. These waves hit the coast with incredible force, tearing away sand and rock that would normally resist ordinary wave action. But it's not just the number of storms, it's their intensity. The largest atmospheric river California experienced last year carried as much water as 50 Mississippi rivers flowing all at once. That's not a typo. 50 Mississippi rivers. When that much water hits land, combined with massive waves, the erosive power is beyond anything engineers designed for. Factor number 3, human interference. For decades, California has built dams, channeled rivers, and constructed harbors. All of this has disrupted the natural flow of sediment to the beaches. Beaches need a constant supply of new sand to replace what's washed away. But we've cut off that supply. Every major river in California has at least one dam, and many have several. These dams trap sediment that would naturally flow to the coast. It's estimated that California's dams prevent over 25 million cubic yards of sediment from reaching beaches every year. To put that in perspective, if you fill dump trucks with that sediment, the line of trucks would stretch from California to New York and back again, twice. Additionally, coastal development has eliminated natural dunes and wetlands that used to absorb wave energy. We've replaced nature's shock absorbers with hard structures like seawalls and roads. And those hard structures, while protecting what's immediately behind them, often accelerate erosion on adjacent beaches. We've essentially re-engineered the entire coastline for short-term human use without fully understanding the long-term consequences. And now those consequences are becoming impossible to ignore. And factor number 4, this one's the most troubling underwater geological changes. Recent sonar mapping of the ocean floor off California has revealed something unexpected. The continental shelf, the underwater extension of the continent, appears to be shifting. Small earthquakes, undetectable on land, are causing micro-collapses of underwater sediment deposits. In other words, the ground beneath the ocean is becoming unstable. Scientists have discovered what they call sediment slumps offshore, essentially underwater landslides triggered by seismic activity. California sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire, one of the most seismically active zones on Earth. While we pay attention to earthquakes on land, we've largely ignored the thousands of small quakes happening underwater every year. Those underwater quakes are shaking loose sediment deposits that have been stable for millennia. When these deposits collapse, they don't just disappear. They slide down into deeper water, creating a deficit along the coast. The ocean then pulls sand from beaches to fill that deficit. It's like the ocean floor is developing sinkholes and the beaches are being drained to fill them. Now imagine all 4 of these factors working together. Warmer, more aggressive waves hitting beaches that aren't getting replenished with sand during an unprecedented storm season, while the underwater foundation itself is shifting. It's not one problem. It's a cascading series of problems, each one making the others worse. Dr. Mitchell, the geologist we mentioned earlier, puts it bluntly, we're not just fighting against the ocean anymore, we're fighting against fundamental changes in the entire coastal system, and right now we're losing. Another scientist, Dr. Patricia Wong from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, added this chilling observation, what concerns me most is the speed. Geological processes usually happen over centuries or millennia. What we're seeing happen in years or even months is, frankly, terrifying. It suggests we've triggered something that's now operating on its own timeline, independent of what we do. Let me show you what looks like on the ground. In the town of Capitola, just south of Santa Cruz, there's a beachfront restaurant that's been there since 1947. It's a local landmark. Families have been going there for generations. 3 days ago, the back deck collapsed into the ocean. The owner, whose grandfather built that restaurant, stood in front of news cameras with tears in his eyes and said, "The ocean used to be 50 yards away. Now it's knocking on our door." He went on to explain that when his grandfather chose that location, local old-timers told him he was building too far from the water. They said customers would complain about the walk. His grandfather ignored them and built where he thought was safe. For 77 years he was right. Now, in less than 5 years, the ocean has closed a gap that took millennia to form. In Malibu, million-dollar homes are being evacuated, not because of fire, California's usual threat, but because the cliffs they're built on are crumbling. One homeowner who bought his house just 5 years ago said his backyard has lost 23 feet in the past 6 months alone. He can stand on his back patio and drop a rock straight down into the ocean. When he bought the house, there was a large yard with a pool, a garden, and a guest house. The guest house went first, demolished before it could fall. Then the pool. Now the main house itself is at risk. He paid $8.5 million for that property. Today, it's worth essentially nothing. The bank that holds his mortgage is threatening foreclosure, but who would foreclose on a house that might not exist in 6 months? Emergency management officials have issued warnings for over 150 miles of California coastline. They're advising people to avoid beaches, not just because of dangerous waves, but because the ground itself is unstable. Last Tuesday in Encinitas, a section of cliff collapsed while people were on the beach below. Thankfully, a lifeguard saw it starting to crack and cleared the area just minutes before tons of rock and sand crashed down. The lifeguard told reporters, "We train for rip currents. We train for sharks. We train for drownings. But we're not trained for the beach itself becoming dangerous." He described hearing a sound like thunder, looking up and seeing cracks racing across the cliff face. He had maybe 90 seconds to evacuate everyone. Some people didn't want to leave, arguing with him, saying he was overreacting. He had to physically push some people to get them moving. 30 seconds after the last person cleared the area, the cliff came down. If he'd hesitated, if he'd been polite instead of urgent, people would have died. Let that sink in. The beach itself is becoming dangerous, and it's not just affecting homeowners and beachgoers. California's coastal economy is worth over $20 billion a year. Tourism, fishing, shipping, recreation, all of it depends on stable coastlines. Port facilities are having to reinforce structures that were built to last 100 years, but are now failing after just 20. Highway 1, the iconic coastal road, has already had to be closed in multiple locations because sections have fallen into the sea. The economic impact is staggering. Insurance companies are pulling out of coastal areas, saying they can no longer calculate the risk. Property values are plummeting. Entire communities are facing an existential question: can we even stay here? Small businesses are closing. Hotels are operating at half capacity because tourists are canceling reservatio. NS. Commercial fishermen are finding that harbors they've used for decades are becoming too dangerous to navigate. One fishing boat captain in Bodega Bay told a reporter that he's considering selling his boat and moving inland. His family has fished those waters for 4 generations. But the harbor entrance has become so unstable that he's damaged his boat twice in the past 3 months just trying to get in and out. Local governments are facing budget crises. Property tax revenues are dropping as values fall. At the same time, they're spending millions on emergency measures, evacuations, and trying to protect critical infrastructure. It's a downward spiral. Less money coming in, more money needed for crisis response, which leads to service cuts, which makes communities less attractive, which drives more people away, which further reduces revenue. Now, you might be thinking, okay, this sounds bad, but can't we just fix it? Build seawalls, reinforce the cliffs, pump in new sand? The experts say it's not that simple. Dr. Robert Hayes, a civil engineer who specializes in coastal protection, explains, "Every solution we try comes with unintended consequences. If you build a seawall to protect one section of beach, you often just shift the erosion problem somewhere else. If you pump in new sand, it washes away within months. We're essentially trying to hold back the ocean with temporary band-aids." He went on to explain that traditional coastal engineering was designed. For stable or slowly changing conditions. But what we're facing now is rapid, accelerating change. The engineering solutions simply can't keep up. Beach nourishment, pumping in new sand, costs millions of dollars and typically lasts only 2 to 5 years before the sand is washed away. In current conditions, that timeline is even shorter. Some beaches that were nourished last year have already lost most of the new sand. Seawalls can protect what's directly behind them, but they often accelerate erosion on adjacent properties. They also destroy the beach itself. You end up protecting buildings but losing the beach that made the location valuable in the first place. And here's the really disturbing part. Some scientists believe we may have already crossed a point of no return for certain sections of California's coastline. Dr. Lisa Kern, a climate scientist at Stanford, made waves last month when she published a paper suggesting that parts of California's coast may need to be abandoned within the next decade. Abandoned. She writes, "We need to have an honest conversation about managed retreat. Some areas simply cannot be saved, no matter how much money or engineering we throw at the problem. The sooner we accept that, the sooner we can plan for an orderly transition." Her paper identified specific sections of coast that are, in her assessment, indefensible. Places where the combination of geology, wave exposure, and rate of erosion make long-term protection essentially impossible. But try telling that to someone whose family has lived in a coastal town for 4 generations. Try telling that to small business owners who've invested their life savings. Try telling that to the millions of Californians whose entire lives are built around the coast. And yet the data doesn't lie. Computer models from the California Coastal Commission project that by 2050, over 600,000 California residents could be at risk from coastal flooding and erosion. By 2100, that number jumps to 2 million. 2 million people. That's equivalent to the entire population of Houston, Texas. Imagine evacuating a city that size. Where do they go? Who pays for it? How do you relocate that many people without creating economic and social chaos? But here's what keeps scientists up at night. Those projections assume that erosion continues at current rates. But what if it accelerates further? What if what we're seeing right now is just the beginning of an exponential curve? Dr. Chen, the oceanographer, admits, "Our models didn't predict what we're seeing this year, which means our models might not be adequate for predicting what comes next. We could be vastly underestimating the speed and scale of what's coming. In other words, it could be worse than we think. Much worse. The models are based on past data and historical trends. But when the system itself is changing, when we're entering territory we've never been in before, the models become less reliable. It's like try to predict the weather using data from a different climate. The tools work, but the assumptions underlying them may no longer be valid. Let's talk about the people living through this right now. Maria Gonzalez has lived in her home in Pacifica for 38 years. She raised 3 kids there. She buried her husband in a cemetery just 2 blocks from the ocean. It's not just a house to her, it's her entire life. Last month, the city told her she needed to evacuate. Her home is now less than 15 feet from a cliff edge that's actively eroding. She told a local news station, "Where am I supposed to go? This is all I have. And even if I wanted to sell, who's going to buy a house that could fall into the ocean next month?" Maria worked as a teacher for 35 years. She saved carefully, paid off her mortgage, and was looking forward to retirement in the home where she'd built so many memories. Now she's 72 years old, on a fixed income, facing the loss of everything she worked for. The city has offered some assistance, but it's nowhere near enough to buy a comparable home elsewhere. She'd have to move far inland, away from the community she's been part of for nearly 4 decades, away from her children and grandchildren who live nearby, away from everything familiar. That's the cruel reality for thousands of Californians right now. They're trapped. They can't leave because their homes are essentially worthless. But staying means living with the constant to fear that everything could literally collapse beneath them. Young families who thought they were investing in their future are now watching that future crumble away. Retirees who plan to live out their final years by the ocean are being forced to start over somewhere else. And for many coastal communities, especially low-income areas, there are no good options. They don't have the resources to relocate. They don't have the political influence to demand government help. They're just stuck. In some areas, entire mobile home parks are at risk. These communities are often home to working-class families, retirees on fixed incomes, and service workers who keep coastal towns running. They have even fewer options than traditional homeowners. One mobile home resident, a 68-year-old former construction worker, said he has about $12,000 in savings. That's his entire safety net. His mobile home is paid off, but it's now worthless. $12,000 won't buy him a new place to live. It won't even cover first and last month's rent plus deposit in most California communities. He asked a simple question: what happens to people like me? Nobody had a good answer. This isn't just an environmental crisis. It's a humanitarian crisis. And it's happening right now in one of the wealthiest states in the wealthiest country in the world. There's also a generational divide emerging. Older residents who've lived in these communities for decades feel betrayed. They followed the rules, bought property that was properly zoned and permitted, paid their taxes, and now they're being told they have to leave. Younger people, meanwhile, are angry that previous generations built in areas that scientists now say were always at risk. They're asking why their parents and grandparents didn't plan better, didn't listen to warnings, didn't prepare for this. But the truth is, nobody really saw this coming. Not at this speed, not at this scale. So where does this leave us? California's beaches are vanishing. That's not speculation, it's documented fact. The rate of erosion has accelerated beyond anything we've seen before, and all the evidence suggests this is going to continue, possibly even accelerate further. The question isn't whether this is happening. The question is, what do we do about it? Some scientists believe we need a massive coordinated response. Billions of dollars in coastal protection. Innovative engineering solutions, strict regulations on coastal development. They point to countries like the Netherlands, which has successfully protected itself from the sea for centuries. They argue that with enough resources and political will, we can engineer our way out of this. Others believe we need to accept reality and start planning for strategic retreat. Move people and infrastructure away from the coast. Let nature reclaim what we never should have built on in the first place. They argue that fighting the ocean is ultimately. Why futile? That we're spending billions to delay the inevitable. That we should use those resources instead to help people relocate to safer areas. And still others believe it's already too late for half measures. That what we're witnessing is the beginning of a fundamental transformation of California's coastline that can be stopped, only adapted to. They suggest we need to completely rethink how we relate to the coast, except that it will be dynamic, changing, dangerous. Plan for flexibility rather than permanence. But here's what everyone agrees on. This isn't just California's problem. What's happening here is a preview of what could happen to coastlines around the world. From Florida to Bangladesh, from the Netherlands to Australia, anywhere with a coastline is vulnerable. California is the canary in the coal mine. Miami Beach is already experiencing similar issues. The Outer Banks of North Carolina are eroding rapidly. Parts of the Texas Gulf Coast are facing the same challenges. And these are just in the United States. Globally, hundreds of millions of people live in coastal zones at risk. Island nations like the Maldives and Tuvalu are facing existential threats. Major cities like Jakarta, Bangkok, and Shanghai are built on land that's sinking while sea levels rise. The World Bank estimates that by 2050, climate-driven migration could displace over 140 million people worldwide. A significant portion of that migration will be from coastal areas. we're witnessing the early stages of what could become one of the largest movements of human populations in history. The beaches that have defined California's identity, its culture, its economy, are disappearing before our eyes. And the people who have studied this their entire lives are using words they've never used before. Unprecedented, alarming. We've never seen this before. Dr. Mitchell, the coastal geologist, said something in a recent interview that really stuck with me. She said, "I've spent my entire career studying how coastlines change. I thought I understood the timescales involved. But what I'm seeing now has fundamentally shaken my understanding of how coastal systems work. We're in uncharted territory from a scientist who has devoted her life to charting exactly this territory. The ocean has been here for billions of years. Human civilization? Just a few thousand. And in that time, we've built our greatest cities, our most valuable real estate, right on the edge of something powerful and unpredictable. Maybe we forgot that the ocean doesn't care about property lines. It doesn't care about investments or infrastructure or human plans. The ocean just does what it's always done. And right now, it's taking back what was always its. For millennia, humans have lived by the coast, but we lived with an understanding of the ocean's power. We built temporary structures. We moved when we needed to. We respected the boundary between land and sea. But the last century, we convinced ourselves we could control that boundary. We built permanent cities on shifting sand. We treated the coast like it was stable, unchanging, ours. The ocean is reminding us that we were wrong. If you found this information valuable, hit that subscribe button. Share this video because people need to know what's happening. The California coast is vanishing, and the question is no longer if this will affect you, but when. Whether you live on the coast or 1,000 miles inland, this will impact you. Economically, socially, politically, mass migration, infrastructure loss, economic disruption, these don't stay localized, they ripple outward. So pay attention, stay informed, and prepare for a future where the maps we grew up with no longer match the reality on the ground. The coastline is changing, and we're all going to have to change with it.